Good afternoon and welcome to the Glendale Water and Power Commission meeting on July 6, 2009. Sheila, may I have roll call, please?
Commissioner Chan.
Present.
Commissioner Ibrahimian.
Present.
Commissioner Miller.
Present.
Commissioner Yao.
Present. And the next item on the agenda?
Item 3, action item, GWP Energy Risk Management Policy.
Excuse me, are we skipping over the approval of the minutes?
Oh, we got number 2, consent items for minutes.
Sorry, consider minutes for the April 6th, May 4th, and June 1st meeting.
Do I hear a motion to approve?
I make such a motion.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The motion is approved. Next item, please.
Item 3, action item, GWP Energy Risk Management Policy.
Mr. President, members of the Commission, I'm Steve Lindsay, Assistant General Manager for Supply, sitting in for Glenn Steiger this evening. And what we have before you today is an update of the GWP Energy Risk Management Policy. We sent out electronic copies, and I've got some extra hard copies here as well, if any of you need them. GWP recently completed its 5-year strategic plan, and one of the areas of focus in that plan and the initiatives in that plan was energy trading. And as part of that focus, GWP over the past year and moving forward has hired several consultants. One is ACES Power Marketing to help us handle real-time trading. And in a study that we'd done recently, the conclusion basically was that it was more industry standard to have 2 separate dispatch groups, one that handles kind of reliability in the city and then another one that handles real-time trading. So we're experimenting with that, and we've got ACES Power on board for a 3-year term to do our real-time power trading. We have the Energy Authority assisting us with our hedging program, and a company called the Risk Management Institute that's basically sitting in as our in-house risk manager, even though they're outside for the moment. They're acting as our risk manager for the meantime. With this team on board and with all the changes that have occurred recently in the market in terms of price volatility and credit risk, we decided it was probably a good time to update the GWP risk management policy, which was adopted in 2003, and a lot's happened since then. So we worked with ACES and TEA and RMI to go through the policy. RMI was actually around back in 2000 when we adopted our original risk management policy and had made some recommendations for changes to the policy back in the 2005-06 time frame that weren't adopted. So we worked those into the changes as well. And the focus of this with ACES, TA, and RMI was to bring the policy kind of up to current industry standards. So some highlights of the policy, we added the city manager representative to the risk management committee. They weren't represented prior in the prior policy. We've added more specific controls over trade limits and authorizations, including adding some commodities and trading venues. And some of those commodities and trading venues include ISO. You may recall that somewhere after 2000, we stopped trading in the ISO because of the fallout of the energy crisis in 2000. And we're with all of these folks helping us, we intend to get back into those markets and sell capacity into some of those markets and see if we can bring some extra revenue into the city. In addition, we've added coal, gasoline, and diesel emissions credits and renewable energy certificates to tradable commodities. We're not currently doing anything with gas, diesel, coal, but we do definitely anticipate needing to trade in emissions credits and renewable energy certificates once the state nails down the Renewable Portfolio Standard program. So there's a lot in the policy. Those are the real highlights. We basically did add some folks to the committee and add some commodities and venues that we could trade with and in. And with that, I guess I'd ask if you have any questions. And if not, we'd recommend that you recommend that council adopt the updated policy.
Any questions?
Just a quick question. Who has the title of GWP Risk Manager?
Right. No, that.
Do we have a person who is the risk manager, or the committee is?
Well, right now, actually, as I indicated, RMI is acting as the GWP risk manager. We intend to have an internal position, but that's not in place yet. We're working on that.
And from what I read, the general manager has the oversight over RMI. Am I not correct?
Yes, the RMI, which is acting as the risk manager, reports directly to Glenn and not to me, because I have a lot of responsibility in the area of trading. So it's a direct report to Glenn.
Right. So he has total oversight over that, and so everything filters up through him, and then the city manager would be the approver, the final approver. Is that how the structure is worked out?
Well, if you want to look at the hierarchy, is actually on page 11 of the policy. And at the bottom, there's operations, administration, and advisory, and that has staff. Above that is the risk management committee. Above the risk management committee is the GWP general manager. Above him is the city manager, and then finally city council. And the policy goes through and lays out the responsibilities of each of those groups. But ultimately, the city council has the authority for approving the policy.
Any questions? Well, some of the questions I have is the other commodities that you mentioned, diesel, gasoline, coal, and potentially REX. It seems like those are part of a fuel mix, so it seems like we can still do those. How are we utilizing those commodities to make money or additional revenue for GWP? Is it just trade basis, or are we actually using the physical commodity, like fueling our trucks with the diesel or gasoline? Are we hedging that way as well?
Well, to date, we haven't done any hedging with diesel or gasoline. Our staff has recognized an opportunity to do something there. If you've seen the price swings of gas over the last 5 to 10 years, some folks mentioned that it might be a good idea to try to hedge some of the prices for the city fleet. And we haven't done that yet, but that's something that Mr. Steiger is talking to the city manager about, and we'll see where we go from
Is
from
that
here
in
on
the policy already? Because I don't remember.
It allows us to trade diesel and gasoline, yes.
Okay. But it doesn't mention that it's going to be for city fleet as well, how we're going to leverage using these commodity for other departments, not just for DWP or GWP. Is that what the policy says?
I don't recall specifically whether on gas and diesel, it's for the whole city.
Okay. So that was my question maybe last year when I think Mr. Basson presented to us, was that how do we limit our exposure, even though we're doing this as part of GWP, but we're doing it on behalf of other city departments and city as a whole. So how do we limit our exposure to something goes wrong? I mean, does all departments in the city have to share the same risk, or is it just GWP?
Well, I think the only commodity that goes cross-department is gas. I haven't been privy to a discussion on how we control that risk once we go outside of GWP. In terms of general controls, though, we control in terms of, credit counterparty risk procedures and limits on the amount of transactions. I think on the diesel, and maybe staff can correct me if I'm wrong, but the volumes that have been put into the policy are similar to the city's, fuel volumes.
To me, it seems like it.
But I'm not aware of a discussion on how we deal with the cross risk at this point.
We're making a motion here, but we're not.
But if we venture into doing anything with gasoline, we'll be working out policies and procedures that would be approved by the Risk Management Committee pursuant to the policy.
Okay, and does the committee include other city heads, department heads as well? Because I don't remember seeing that as well.
It includes someone from the finance department, includes audit, includes... let me get to the actual page of the committee makeup. Starting on page 12 of the policy, it has the committee as the GWP General Manager, the AGM, the GWP Risk Manager, the AGM of Finance, GWP Assistant General Manager of Finance, a City Manager Representative, an Internal Audit Representative, and a City Attorney Representative. So we've got 4 other departments represented on the committee.
I have a question next. I noticed this when I was reading it earlier. The commission is not mentioned in this policy at all. And we have this piece of paper here, getting us ready to motion to approve. And I think it's a great idea. The commission is here to serve advisory role. And so if we're going to be motioning to approve this, why is the commission not listed in the policy?
Well, you're actually technically not approving the policy. This hierarchy that's on page 11 has bodies that have authority with respect to the policy. This commission is advisory to the council only, and so under the policy you actually don't have any authority, and your approval today is a recommendation to the council to adopt the policy. And so that's why you're not...
Do we even need this?
That's a recommendation.
It's a recommendation to the council to adopt the
council.
policy.
I think we need to show the council that we did consider it.
You did see it,
Yeah,
then. Okay.
that's something that's expected of us. Yes, thank you. Let's see. I take it that these the contracts for the different parties here that are retained are separate contracts, or are they all on one contract?
They're all separate retainers.
Okay, all right. The hedging that's done that's not obviously through some formula or something. It's it's constantly being reevaluated how to hedge. I take it, or how often is it?
It's a hedging program that's laid out over time based on some programmatic buying, which is just kind of regular programmatic buying, and volatility, and buying opportunities based on volatility. So if you get huge dips in prices at times, then you'll dip into volatility ranges where that's a good buying opportunity, because history tells you that volatility bands only stray so far from kind of the price action. And so we have a program based that layers in some programmatic buying and then some buying based on buying opportunities depending on what the market does over time. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about that when I give you the quarterly risk management update, and talk to you a little bit about, typically on the very front month, what our goal is to be hedged, and then how that changes in the outer months. Typically we're more hedged in the closer months, and as time goes on, we're not the system's not as hedged, and we've got our plan in place, our hedging plan in place, and we're waiting for opportunities to appear to fill in those hedge percentages.
So I take it that the consultants are evaluating those triggers over
Daily.
some period of time? Daily?
Daily.
Okay, all right. Do we know, can we estimate the savings to ratepayers by using this policy as opposed to no policy or the past policy? Is there any way of, we've talked about that in past meetings, but I think it's only been kind of a qualitative statement.
You mean savings to ratepayers if we use no hedging policy versus,
If it was done
or a risk management policy?
risk management policy.
It'd be difficult to calculate. I don't think we've ever taken a stab at calculating that, but I mean, we are protecting against, credit risk loss, all sorts of losses. It's almost like insurance. So I guess you'd be asking us to say, to try to figure out what it would cost us if we have no insurance. And I guess the question is, we don't know what all those catastrophic events, are or could be. I can bring you something in the future related to kind of what hedging does to our costs over time, but generally it just smooths out the price over time.
These policies are fairly common among power utilities, I take it. And so there's other policies we've had a chance to review to compare ours with, I take it. Or have we had that chance?
Well, when we originally adopted the policy in 2003, we did compare the policy to several other cities, in the area, and ours is a fairly, industry standard policy, and it's definitely robust.
Okay.
And more so now.
Could you elaborate on the difference between the risk manager's responsibility and the general manager's in terms of managing this risk, the risk that you elaborated on?
The risk manager's responsibility is to review some of the the credit policies related to the various counterparties and give us information related to those counterparties, and to review the risk management policy, and to review all of our trades, and to report to the committee and to the general manager regarding the whole program. I mean, ultimately, it flows up to the general manager. The risk manager does report to the general manager.
And the general manager is responsible for all the decisions related to manage the risk, then?
Correct.
So the risk manager is basically responsible for estimating the risks and making recommendations to control it in a manner that helps the city out.
Correct, and if you, there's detail on page 14 that lays out all of the GWP risk manager duties, including that ensuring that risks for all transactions have been identified and can be valued, monitoring the portfolio and risk management activities of the organization, being able to calculate the financial exposure of our portfolio by applying risk measurements, providing or utilizing expertise on financial products and pricing, and structuring of physical contracts with embedded financial futures, providing periodic reports to the GWP General Manager, as I just mentioned, and the Energy Risk Management Committee on the risk profile of our portfolio, and finally performing a check on the credit risk function responsibilities and reporting that to the Energy Risk Management Policy Committee.
Is the policy online? Is it available for a ratepayer to look at?
This current the 03 policy, is it?
Not sure.
I'm not sure.
All right. Well, I'm asking all
But
my
we'd be glad to
questions.
put it online, and we can, and if we have an updated, adopted policy, we'd be glad to put that online as well.
I'm asking all my questions, thinking of an audience possibly participating in TV who might want to know a little bit more about what we're talking about here.
Sure.
So, thank you, though. I thought it was very well prepared.
Commissioner Miller, I believe that the policy is online as part of the commission packet for today's agenda, so certainly if someone wanted to see it in connection with this meeting, they could, and I believe that'll stay online as part of the city's records of commission meetings.
Thanks.
I have another question. Maybe the answer to this question is in the handout here, but for ACES, APM, and TA, RMI, all those contracts, are they annual contracts? Or
The ACES contract has a 3-year term. The RMI contract, I believe, is monthly, and the TEA contract is a 1-year term.
okay, thanks.
Mr. Lins, a few more questions. So the last I remember Mr. Steiger mentioned was that our exposure or financial exposure is about $1 million. So that's like the maximum we can lose at any given point if we do a market-to-market. Is that still true? And also, so that was number one. And also, if you can bring back maybe in the future and how we spread that risk out among other city departments, because it'll be behoove us to understand how GWP ratepayers are maybe being used as collateral if other departments are not putting up anything and they're getting the benefit of our risk management. So that's
Currently, right now, there's no risk spread to other departments because we're not doing any fuel hedging.
Right.
So currently, there's none. All of that risk is borne by the ratepayers, and it's all transactions for the ratepayers' benefit, and they're all backed up by the basically the revenue fund of GWP. So that there is no risk outside of GWP at this point in time.
Yeah, in the future, when you start hedging diesel and gasoline and coal, I mean, potentially we're making money for, well, this is more than just an insurance policy, as you mentioned before. I mean, I heard Mr. Steiger said this potential be a revenue maker for us. And so hopefully our policy is such that we can generate additional revenue to offset any rate increases in the future. So we're expecting that to happen and not just using this as an insurance policy to minimize our costs.
No, and if we come forward with any sort of fleet fuel hedging, we'll be glad to bring you the program before we go to council with it.
Great, appreciate it. So is the $1 million loss still accurate?
I'm not familiar with that number, and I don't know if staff is familiar with that number.
Okay, well, you can confirm with Mr. Steiger when he comes back.
Sure.
Next meeting.
Discussing this.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Lins. Sheila, next item.
Pardon me, aren't we to consider the motion?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. So with that, do I hear a motion to recommend to the City Council for the adoption of this risk management policy?
Before we do that, Commissioner Foley just showed up. We should give him an opportunity to ask questions if he has any, I would say. In that case, I'm willing to make a motion that the City Council adopt the the energy risk management policy that GWP has drafted.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I will now turn over to Mr. Foley. Oh, no, go ahead.
4A.
Mr. President, members of the Commission, once again, Steve Lenz, Assistant General Manager of Supply for Glenn Steiger. Every quarter, we do try to come to you and give you an update on what is going on with our hedging program. And I think it's important to recognize that about 55% of our total system is already locked up in long-term contracts with outside resources. So what's left is about 45% of our system that we can use the hedging program on. And we typically are hedged between 55% and 95% of our system. And as I indicated, as we approach a month, so for example, July, we typically are more hedged than 10 months out. And we've got a hedging program that has targets based on that hedging program, so that if you're in a certain buying opportunity zone that's a particularly good one, you can hedge more further out because it's such a good buying opportunity. So, for example, right now, the current month for July 09, we're hedged 90%. So that's the 55% that's already locked in, and the additional 35% to take it up to 90% of our system's hedge. Everything else is covered with short-term purchases. That's not locked in on price. For January 2010, and this can kind of give you a feel of what the progression is, we're only hedged 72%. For June 2010, we're down to 57%. And for January 11, we're at about 56% hedge, which is about just what our contracts are locked in at. And so typically over time, we like to leave the out months open, to see what happens with the market. As we get closer, we start to lock some prices in. I did hand out a chart. I'll get that to you in a moment. But we continue to work with the Energy Authority and ACES on a daily basis to take advantage of these opportunities as we move forward, and at the same time try to comply with the risk management policy that you folks just took a look at. I did hand out a chart that looks like this. The main point of this chart is just to give you an idea of what some of the gas prices are looking like. The red line at the top of the top chart shows a portion of the system that was hedged back when prices were really high. And I don't have a chart going back at this point in time, but it wasn't long ago that we had gas around $14. And so as we were falling off of that $14, we were putting some hedges in place to make sure that we didn't skyrocket back up above those $14. And one of the main objectives of our hedging program is really to protect against blowouts. I mean, it's insurance against blowouts. We're trying to keep the rates down and make sure we're not getting caught at, high volumes, $14 gas. And the blue line on the bottom of that top chart represents what the market price is today if you purchased gas out through June 2010. And if you did do that, the green line would approximate your cost over that future time period. If you move to the bottom, you can see 2010 to 2011. That blue line, once again, is the futures curve going forward. And you may hear a lot in the news these days about gas being really low. You hear, $3 gas. Well, the thing is, you get out just a few months, and it's as you can see, get out to December '09, you're up to $5 gas. Get out to February 10, you're up to $6 gas. So once you get out just a few months, those gas prices haven't really come off that much. And you can see winter 11, you're up, $7.20 currently. So, we are watching these daily, and as we move forward, you'll also notice on that bottom chart that we have very little hedged that far out because we're waiting for buying opportunities. The market is coming off right now, and we're not currently in a buying zone. So that's how we go. That's how we work with the hedging program moving forward. And if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Questions? Thank you.
Oh, sorry. It seems like we hedged in the past because, like you mentioned last year, gas was from $12 to $14, and that was just a year ago. And even though looking back, we shouldn't have made that bet or hedge because we could have bought a spot market for a $3 or $4 gas. So is there a way we can maybe take that back retroactively and maybe purchase a low price, or
Anyway, we can tell what the future is.
take a loss and
No, I mean,
purchase?
that's why we have a hedge program in place. You can always say, woulda, coulda, shoulda. If gas prices were lower, gee, we should have brought the lower price. But, we really need to put a program in place based on price history and follow our experts' advice and just try to layer in hedges when our program indicates that it is statistically the best thing to do. Because you don't know where the market's going to go. And right now, you'll see on that top chart, we've layered in some $6 gas out to June 2010. Well, gas could easily blow out between now and June 2010 and go up to, $12. And we wouldn't be paying more than, $6.50 because the hedges are in place. So when the market starts to swing back up, we've been swinging down for quite a while now, but when it starts to swing back up, you're going to see some of the benefit of having those hedges in place when the market's on the upside.
I agree. I was looking at a ratepayer perspective where if we anticipate rates going to go up by a certain amount, maybe for next year go up by 3 or 4%. So if we lock in gas prices where our rate increase will be less than that, should we make that purchase right there and then so we can lock it in for next year so that rates won't go up 3 or 5%, but just go up by 2 or 3%?
Well, we've got a goal to reduce rates by 35% below Edison by 2014, so I don't think we want to lock in an increase of 2 to 3%. I think we want to do the best we can to optimize that hedging program and, follow what our experts are telling us is statistically the best approach to take.
Oh, obviously, but if our model shows that what we do now in terms of purchasing fuel prices, if it's actually below our predicted rates or costs, should we just make that move? And is that part of your policy, is just to book or purchase the fuel so that we can limit our costs?
Well, we are trying to protect against the upside, but we're not trying to lock in any particular cost or fuel adjustment charge. We're trying to optimize it. So, the problem with that approach is if you locked it in and then the next year the market cratered and you could have had a 10% reduction in your rate, then where are you? So, in our mind, it's best to optimize and to take into account the possibility that the market's going to go up and the possibility that the market's going to go down, and use our program to optimize that view.
Okay. Thank you.
I noticed the data on this graph that you have there, you didn't have any data showing the unhedged cost exceeding the hedged cost. Is that simply because we didn't have data going back that far? Or that would have been helpful, I think.
I'm not sure I'm clear on your question.
Well, a time at which the cost of gas would have been greatly in excess of the blended amount because of the hedging.
We have data going back that far, but this was intended to give you a forward look at our program and what we're doing with the hedging program.
All right.
And how long have we been hedging or engaging in this program?
Since 2000.
And is it still viewed
not as aggressively as we are now. It was around a year ago that we started to get some of these hedging consultants in place and to get a little bit more aggressive and programmatic with our hedging. From 2000 till not very long ago. When did TEA start?
end of last year?
So it was only 6 months ago that they started. Up to that point, we weren't doing specific programmatic hedging. It was kind of hedging made on a case by case basis by a trader and the general manager that didn't incorporate kind of statistical models and volatility models and buy zones and things that we hope will optimize the hedging program.
Thank you. Any other questions? Sheila, next item.
Item 4B, water report, update on water conservation ordinance.
I guess it's the Steve Lynn show tonight. Mr. President, members of the Commission, Peter Gavunis is not in tonight. He did give me an update to give to you, and I wasn't directly involved, so I'll give you the update, and then if we have questions, Christine did draft the ordinance, so maybe she can answer some of them, but I guess I would suggest that any detailed questions be held till both Peter and Glenn are back, because they were both intimately involved with the entire process. On June 30th, City Council approved revisions to the existing ordinance, a conservation ordinance, updating the no water waste provisions and changing the mandatory conservation phase program. At times when conservation is essential, the city will enact the appropriate phase, limiting the number of days during the week when landscape irrigation is permitted. Once the new ordinance goes into effect, which is July 31st, 2009, staff will recommend to council to enact phase 2 of mandatory conservation. During that phase, landscape irrigation is limited to Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays at 10 minutes for each irrigation station. And watering is only allowed between 6 p.m. and 9 a.m. As a result of coordination with the cities of Burbank and Pasadena, those provisions are very similar across all three of the foothill cities. Enforcement of these provisions of the ordinance will be conducted by neighborhood services, and the city will make every effort to ensure compliance while remaining sensitive to special situations. There's a hotline that's been put in place, and that hotline is 818-550-4426. Once again, that's 818-550-4426, and it's been established to anonymously report any observed water wasting practices. When a call is received, staff will contact the property owner of the alleged water waste and provide them with some educational materials on conserving water. And at the same time, the matter will be referred to neighborhood services for follow-up and continued observation. Finally, Council has asked for clarification of some circumstances, and I actually was at the second reading of the ordinance when Council was talking about potentially having some sorts of special circumstances for watering vegetable gardens or maybe trees that need longer than 10-minute watering because they need a deep watering. But staff is working on those requested clarifications, and those will be brought back to council, I presume, with the adoption of the second phase. But that's all I have on the update, and once again, if you have questions, maybe Christine can answer, but if not, we can come back next month with more detail from Peter and Glenn Steiger.
One quick question. Sure.
Okay. Yeah, I have a quick question as well. After the phone call comes in, materials sent out, educational materials sent out, at what point do we issue a ticket? Are fines involved here?
There are fines involved. It's actually handled through neighborhood services, and it's a criminal prosecution if it gets to that stage. But before we would go there, we would provide materials, as you indicated, to the resident, along with a copy of the no water waste policy. So the first time it would be a courtesy notice. After that, neighborhood services would get involved, and they would investigate, and if it's warranted, then they would issue a citation.
The first citation will require a fine.
Would require a fine, and the first fine would be $100.
Okay, I see. And it gets progressively higher?
Gets progressively higher for repeat offenders. It would be, I believe, $200 and then $500 after that.
Okay.
And then the final violation, I believe, actually becomes a misdemeanor.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
After, what is it, the fourth violation in a year?
The fourth violation, 3 convictions or no low contendere pleas. After that, it becomes a misdemeanor.
Have the provisions, sorry,
I'm done.
have the provisions that required homeowners to reduce their usage back to 2006 rates, has that been eliminated then from the ordinance?
That was eliminated. So there were two different options that were presented to the City Council, one of which was the cutback from the 2006 or a base year's usage, the other of which was similar to what Pasadena, Burbank, and Los Angeles are doing. That's the option that Council opted for, and that was landscape watering restrictions.
And so clearly the emphasis is on the landscape, since that's the majority of use. So the new ordinance wouldn't affect apartment dwellers or condo dwellers. Is that correct?
Well, it would affect them insofar as there are still those no water waste policy provisions. So if someone were hosing down their sidewalk, or if they're not repairing their leaks, or things of that nature would still be included in the ordinance.
Okay. And then what steps are being undertaken to notify the public of the fact that it doesn't have to be back to 2006 yet, and here's the current statute and what it's going to be?
I will ask Atine if she's able to answer that question.
Members of Commission, hello, my name is Atina Hartunian, Public Benefits Coordinator. We have established a very heavy outreach plan, working with our city's PIO office, and they're approving it as we're going along. Our first step is to notify every customer through a letter that will be sent to our customers by the end of this week, notifying them of the ordinance that was adopted June 30th and what City Council is looking at into adopting in August 4th. And it talks about our updated no water waste policy and steps that they could take for conservation, as well as information on what they can do to educate family members as well as tenants that are residing in multifamily establishments. That's the first step. And then we'll follow that along with bill inserts that will go for every customer again for the next 4 months. And then we will still be holding our water conservation 101 classes, and we are taking out an ad campaign in many of the local newspapers in different languages that notify customers of the new ordinance, as well as the water conservation classes we have available for them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
These fine amounts, do they apply to both residential and commercial?
They do. They apply across the board, and it's consistent with what it's the same penalties that would apply for other violations of the code.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a few more questions about that. For the exemption, I didn't hear landscape or gardeners who make water in the afternoon. Are they exempt from that? If the part of the job is to landscape someone's yard, are they allowed or not allowed to water?
No, they are still subject to those time restrictions, so they would have to water before 9 a.m. or after 6 p.m.
Okay.
Even if they do it with a hose?
Even if they do it with a hose, yeah.
Really?
Oh, so they're not.
The reasoning for that was the evaporation, to avoid the evaporation of water during the hottest time of the day.
I'm hoping someone may relay that message. 'Cause that's part of the job is that's the livelihood is to do landscaping. I mean, was that being considered as an exemption?
That was brought up at City Council. It was mentioned that there is a similar exemption to what you're describing in, I believe it's the Beverly Hills ordinance.
LA as well.
And perhaps in Los Angeles. And the concern was, as you mentioned, for gardeners or others who that's part of their job. And I believe the way Beverly Hills resolved it is that they had half of the city couldn't water on one day and the other half couldn't water on the other day. And the concern, I think, that was brought out at the City Council meeting was that would be really difficult to track for folks. It would be hard enough to know which days of the week to water, let alone which part of the city you're in, which day does that mean, and it was too confusing.
So it sounds like the emphasis will be back on the homeowner or the resident to tell the landscapers not to water, or else if they're not home, then if the landscaper watered, then they would get fined or they potentially be reported.
Potentially, but again, the first time it would be a notice and an informational outreach. So hopefully, with that emphasis on education, the message would get across.
And what happens, how long do we test run this? I mean, part of the city report before to the commission was that potentially the baseline method would be more effective because we're penalizing them and they see an economic loss if they actually use water or wastewater. So how long do we play with this pilot? I mean, it seems like a lot of people might say that this is not effective because it's hard to police or it might not deter people from wasting water. So when do we give this a run before we maybe try to do something more more effective, like using that baseline?
Well, I think we need to see how it plays out, but that's a good question for Mr. Steiger and Mr. Kavunas to determine at what point they decide this is working wonderfully or this is not working and we need to look at another approach.
Yeah, because from the last I hear was that potentially the water could cost $2,500 per acre foot. I mean, almost 5 times or 4 or 5 times our cost of water now. I mean, if we don't implement this or if this becomes ineffective, everyone's paying for it at that exorbitant price. So we need to set maybe some kind of a milestone where we say that this is not effective. Let's move on to the next type of method that would work. Thank you.
Mr. Miller?
Thank you. Could you repeat when the new ordinance becomes effective?
July 31st, 2009.
Okay. And supposing, to tie into what Commissioner Yao said, I think that if we find that we aren't meeting the MWD requirements or in danger of that, I think it would be useful I think it behooves us to take a second look at this and see if there's something we could do better with it. I'm a little bit concerned that we may have some trouble with this particular method because there are problems with enforcement and monitoring of it compared to the other method that was being considered. What's the fate of the money that's assessed in terms of fines? Is it used to go against any penalties that would be imposed on the city by MWD, or does it go to some other department?
Unfortunately, no, because it becomes a criminal prosecution, those penalties would not come back to the Glendale Water and Power Department. It would go towards enforcement or to the court system if it were to get to that stage where it was in the court.
And pay the administrative costs. Is it adequate to pay the administrative costs on those systems to administer this program?
Perhaps Doreen could answer that question.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. As Christine Godin has indicated, because now the matter falls within the court system, when citations are issued, the first 3 cites being infractions and subsequent violations being misdemeanors in 1 year's time, unfortunately, all of the fines assessed and the penalty assessments, which range from 170% or upwards in accordance with whatever is imposed by the state, they all are payable to LASC, Los Angeles Superior Court. So none of the fines come back to the city.
And thank you, Doreen. And that is consistent with other prosecutions that we would have on our municipal code. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct. Once a case is filed with the court, whether it's for unpermitted structures or leash law violations or the water conservation ordinance violations, once it's in court, then the fines are payable to the Los Angeles Superior Court.
And do neighborhood services have to witness the violation, or is it going to be your neighbor calling and reporting that my neighbor ran his water at 5 in the afternoon or 4 in the afternoon? Is that going to be sufficient?
Doreen Martirosian is our former prosecutor for the city, so I'll ask her to answer that question.
In my experience, usually the neighborhood services inspectors either witness the violation or they have sufficient evidence before them to conclude that the violation was committed by the property owner or by the individual.
So people are going to have concerns about that. I mean, if you don't like your neighbor and you want to call and say they were running their water, somebody has to witness it. I mean, just due process, right? I mean, you can't just run off and cite somebody for not actually having the supporting evidence behind it, right?
Correct. And that's why when we send the first courtesy notice and the information to the individual who is alleged to be violating the ordinance, neighborhood services becomes involved and monitor the situation.
Thank you. Questions?
Yes. Has this program ever been tried before elsewhere? Do we know that it's effective? I know that the other option that was under consideration had been used in the drought in the early 90s and was thought to be effective. Do we have any record with this particular kind of program?
I don't know the answer to that. Once again, I'm guessing that's a question for Mr. Kavunas. I don't know if Christine has any.
No, I don't, but that's something I'm sure Peter Kavunas could answer.
Returning to the question of the fate of the money that's assessed in fines, we don't know how much whether that would pay for the cost of administration on the part of those systems, the justice system or whatever, to handle these cases, or do we know that?
We don't know that, but again, that would be the court's cost that money would be collected for, so it wouldn't be the city's internal cost that would be recouped.
That's all I have.
Well, obviously, City Council has adopted the ordinance, so this is going forward. I think we need to focus how we're going to implement the ordinance at this point. And I think there are a couple of critical issues that I see that are extremely important. One is the enforcement, obviously, you mentioned. And the other one is the public relations. I think we need to make sure everyone knows what this policy is, when is it going to start, and in simple words, we should explain exactly what the policy is.
Well, I know Atina can speak to this, but there is an extremely aggressive public outreach program associated with the effective date of the ordinance, and if you want details, I suppose Atina can give that to you, but they're working very hard to come out with an aggressive public outreach program.
Do we know when that starts, or has it started? There was something in the news press recently about it, but beyond that?
Like I said, the letter will be sent out at the end of this week. The ads do start on Wednesday and Saturday, and then they sporadically will run through July. And then as soon as we have the final decision from City Council on August 4th, we'll really go into heavy television advertising, cable TV mostly, and advertisements as well as. But the first step is the direct mail letter to customers, which seems to work very well with our customer base, and that's just a very informative letter, and then we'll follow it up with that.
And we will have monthly reports during this commission meeting to see how this is working out or is not working out. Obviously, it's the responsibility of this commission to look at whether it's working or not and make other recommendations to the council through GWP. We will have reports
monthly reports, and then track it. Maybe let a couple months go just to track the saturation of what's going on, and then if we're seeing conservation or water production.
Thank you.
I remember from several meetings ago, there was an issue with the point of sale where new fixtures were going to be required, point of sale. Has that been eliminated?
That was eliminated from the ordinance, and the reasoning for that was that there is actually pending state legislation. It's Senate Bill 407 that is dealing with that exact issue. And depending on the outcome of that legislation, we may or may not proceed with that.
Okay. Thank you.
This should be kind of viewed as like the first step, right? I mean, we have to resolve the problems immediately if we can and figure out what to do long-term for conservation. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
Any other questions?
I just want to point out that we're relying on the public to do the enforcement to a great extent, I think. That's correct to say. And consequently, the public needs to be informed and motivated to do this. And I think the only thing that a GWP can do is make sure that they're informed. The issue of the motivation will have to rely on the goodwill of the public to help out with that. So, folks out there, help us out if you can. Thank you.
Thank you. Next item, Sheila.
Item 2, water supply report.
Mr. President, members of the Commission, I believe we've got water staff here to give you that report.
Good afternoon. I'm Pat Hayes, Principal Civil Engineer, GWP Water. Apologize, our report was not ready in time for the distribution deadline last week. I will give you a couple of brief highlights on that. It will be included in next month's report. Our conservation efforts, a timely point to pick up on that. We were 2% over our consumption last year for the month of May. So the voluntary reductions had not proven effective through that month, although we were delivering still well within our goal of 70-30 with Metropolitan Water Supply being the 70%. On the year, we're at 64% coming from Metropolitan. The most important development in our water supply and affecting that proportion was that our largest producing well, GN4, was out of production in the Glendale operating unit, and we collectively got a unanimous support of all the involved parties to trial a method that we used briefly the last time it was rehabilitated, and we're able to get it back into production in about a 2.5 or 3 week period. So that well in itself produces about 37% of the total output of the GOU. It was out of service for basically about a month and a half, and it's now back in service. So that water supply is back in our use. The last element to point out in the report that you'll be seeing next time around is that our recycled water use is up slightly, which is a good sign.
Do we have any explanation as to why the 2% increase over last year in consumption? The weather is pretty moderate.
The weather's been moderate, and you'll see when you get the next report, we've started tracking another set of parameters. There's a CIMUS station in Glendale that tracks temperature and evapotranspiration. So we're starting to see how that relates to water consumption, and we'll have some data points for you the next time around. Yes, the weather appeared to be fairly moderate, but the consumption was up slightly from the 2006 base year.
Thank you. Questions? Next item.
Chevy Chase update.
Chevy Chase update I'll address as well. Pleased to report that the leak test for the north cell, which was completed over the weekend, passed with flying colors. So that water supply is now available to us for the summer months, particularly important for fire suppression. The project's on track for substantial completion by October 6th. And the last of the concrete work, which affects the number of trips up the canyon, will be done in the next month. So things are progressing very nicely up there. That's the last I have on Chevy Chase.
Great, thank you. Before we leave water, though, a quick question. Is the city has to comply with the ordinance as well, right? The city's not exempted from the 3 days a week?
Yes, that's true.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
And I'll add to it that we have tracked the statistics as to what we expect to happen, and we'll be reporting on that monthly to this commission. I think the same points that all of you as commissioners have raised, we share in the engineering department, that this is a prescriptive solution, and as such, it's not a goal-oriented solution as was the original proposal. And we don't want to be in a position as a city to come to the deadline next June 30th and say, well, we owe a large fine. We need to track our performance so that we're in a position to make a course correction. The prescriptive approach is a very straightforward way to go about things, but it's not particularly goal-oriented, and as such, we need to be on top of that. Another disadvantage is that the MWD fines start accumulating as of July 1st, 2009. We're already in that period, but this ordinance will not be in place until a month has passed. So we're already starting a little bit behind. We really do need the public's awareness and compliance to make this work.
Thank you. Next item.
Item 4C, Customer Services Report Number 1, Refrigerator Replacement Program.
Mr. President, members of Commission, hello. My name is Atine Hartunian. I'm here to give you a update on our Cool Care program, our low-income refrigerator recycling program, and the $100 fee that you recommend us not charging customers. I just wanted to briefly start off with some information on our current program. It started in 2002, and to date, over 3,650 low-income customers have applied and have received new refrigerators through this program. We receive about 5 to 10 applications weekly, ranging depending on the week. Customers pay a $100 copay for their new refrigerator, for their new Energy Star refrigerator, and that is payable on their bi-monthly GWP bill over 2 years. So they get billed $8.33 a month for the new refrigerator, and they can pay that over 2 years back to GWP. The prior commission requested that we charge the customers the $100 fee when we presented the program to them in 2002, and such City Council also approved the $100 charge. We have only had 153 customers that have canceled, their new refrigerators. The number one reason being that the refrigerator is too small. They want either a side-by-side, they don't want a top and bottom. Sometimes they don't want the color white. But the main reason they don't want the refrigerator is because we offer either a 15 cubic feet or an 18.5 cubic feet, and they want something a little bit larger than that, and our program doesn't cover that. Canceling now the $100 fee we believe wouldn't be fair to the over 3,000 customers that have already paid or are currently paying for the program. They also have the opportunity to pay for a warranty, which is $89, if they want to proceed with a 5-year warranty and purchase that. And that goes on their bill for $7.49 over a 2-year period as well. They can pay that. Currently, our Glendale Care program is offering the same low-income customers $10 off their monthly bill, so it's $20 off every 2 months. And so that's a benefit for the low-income customers that are in the Cool Care program. They could also apply for the Glendale Care program. And also the new refrigerators that they get replace the 10-year-old refrigerators, so they are saving more money on their electricity as they move forward with the new refrigerators. So that is just my update on the program and why we think we should continue with the $100 fee, because or else we would have to go back and probably refund the money to the 3,000 that have already paid for it.
I have a question. This program started in 2002. So far, you have maybe about 3,000
3,650
that have taken advantage of this?
Yes.
About how many more do you think?
Well, on average, we get 5 to 10 a week, and we do know that we have a lot of new low-income customers coming into the city. Once the customer has received the refrigerator, they can't reapply again. So we do keep track of all our customers. But, depends on if we also advertise the program more, we start seeing more applications. But as customers are coming into Glendale, they're aware of the program and they apply. So we see a steady amount of 5 to 10 per week. It never gets overloaded after that point.
Mm-hmm. And have you done a study or made a projection if you eliminated the $100 fee? Do you think the participation will be a lot higher?
We've looked into it and we've asked other cities, and their study, when the ones that do give the refrigerators away, they had a higher interest in the beginning, but they have just about, if not less than we do, in terms of applications that come in. And I'm not sure how stringent their qualifications are for our program, but ours just is similar across the board for our low-income program. So we compared our numbers to other cities, and they're seeing about the same amount of applications coming in. So we know it's not the $100 fee that's decreasing the amount of applications. We're aware of that. We're sure of that.
Okay. Yeah, this is all a matter of figuring out how much energy we'll be saving with these new refrigerators, and is it worth, balancing that with the decrease in the money coming in. I trust that your study is complete, and so if the recommendation is to keep it, then we'll keep it. I don't know how the rest of the commissioners feel.
Is the plan to keep the program in the works indefinitely?
For now, it is. It's been a pretty strong program. We haven't had any reason to change it for any reason, and I know other cities have adopted the same program because they know ours was pretty effective. And we are working with Southern California Public Power Authority, SCAPA, and we are contracting with the same contractor for all utilities. So we believe that as we still have applications coming in, we want to keep the program until we know we've saturated the customer base.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Hartunian, what is the cost for each refrigerator to offset that $100 charge?
The refrigerators cost us about $553, and if the customer was to go out and buy it in the store, it's, I believe, $620, depending on the size that they get. But our program costs for each refrigerator is $533.67 is how much we pay for each.
That's good to know, because $100 is a big expense for someone who maybe can't afford it. What about to Commissioner Chan's point that if other cities are not charging the $100 to their customers, can we do some kind of a tier structure where our lowest of the lowest income customers get it for free, so that everyone else, all the other low income customers, based on their income threshold, they can pay the $100, but we put another threshold so that those people who are least like to afford even $100, they can get that for free?
Well, we follow just one low-income guideline threshold, and that's consistent with what the state of California follows. So it's a certain percentage of the poverty line. So we wouldn't be able to have two different types of thresholds. No other city does that either. It's just one set of income guidelines that the customers follow. And if it's, for example, if it's a family of two, then there's a certain income, and then 3 and 4. So it's grouped. Every member adds a certain amount of money to the household income. So we would have to have the one threshold for each for the program. It wouldn't really make sense if we had someone that's lower or not. It also depends on the number of people in the family, and it just wouldn't be fair.
So you don't think it makes sense to have two separate thresholds, one for...
Because when we look at when the applicants apply for the program, they just tell us they prove that they're low income by providing their income documentation, and at times providing medical proof that they're either receiving Medi-Cal or healthy families, and we associate that with them being low income, and then if necessary we ask them to provide the low income documentation. But there's just this one set income guideline that they follow, and that's the one that the state follows, and the gas company program.
The $200% above the federal poverty guideline.
Yes.
But is there any way we can do it, maybe just 100% for our lowest of the low income customers?
We can look into that. It's not something we've done for any of our other programs. I don't know how that would affect our program at all.
I was just curious
yeah.
if that was done in the past, or if that was being considered, so that we can follow other cities' lead by offering free refrigerators for those who can at least afford it.
Let me just make a point. I'm Ned Basson with Glendale Water and Power. When we did this program and started charging the fee, it was actually offset by the savings in electricity. So there's really not much of an out-of-pocket cost to the person who's making use of this. And after the first 2 years, they're then saving money.
Have you seen any customers not want the program because they had to pay the $100? Has anybody?
No, we haven't had that, and we have been tracking that. And when the customer cancels, we ask them why they're canceling. And of the 153 that have canceled, we have not had a single one say that they can't afford it. Sometimes, ironically, customers want to pay the $100 immediately and get it over with. So we ask them to write a letter, and then they provide the $100 fee. But to date, we haven't had a single customer not apply for the $100 fee. And we usually screen them before. When we send them the application, we screen them when we receive the application. And so they are aware of the copay. And the ones they know also, if it's a 2-year, they pay over a 2-year period, they don't normally question it. They're okay with it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Do you handle the energy efficiency programs as well?
The majority, yes.
Okay. Public benefits bucket is the one that handles all the energy efficiency programs, right? So whatever money that would be lost as a result of not charging will come out of the public benefits fund. Mm-hmm. I guess what it boils down to is how aggressive we want our energy efficiency programs to be. If we really want to be more energy efficient, then this would be a good way to do it. Not make that as a roadblock for low-income families to get a more energy efficient refrigerator. Mm-hmm. So that's what my recommendation is to, I guess, for you and Glenn and the rest of the crew to look at all the programs. And if we do need to improve in that area, that is certainly one thing we can look at. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item, Sheila.
Item 4C2, electricity used by city facilities, by Ned Basson.
Members of the Commission, this is kind of a cleanup item from last month. During discussion, it was asked what percentage of the city's retail use of energy is from the city's retail sales of energy is used for city facilities. And that is about 23,000 megawatt hours a year, which works out to be about 2% of our retail sales.
Thank you. Any other questions or any questions?
Why was that information requested? I don't recall. Do you?
I don't recall either. I know there was discussion about energy use, and then the question came up, well, how big is the city?
We'll figure it out.
Thank you, though, for researching it.
Next item.
Item 4D, Power. The first one is Power 5-Year Forward CIP Plan by Steve Vince.
Mr. President, members of the Commission, I believe that you were interested in seeing a 5-year forward CIP plan for power, and I've handed out two documents. One is an 8.5 by 14-inch document and entitled Glendale Water and Power Capital Expenditures. That document shows the past 5 years and the next 5 years. The second document is a little more detail, showing you 09-10 through 13-14. It's entitled Power Supply 5-Year CIP Plan. And I'd just like to highlight a couple of things on here. This is a tentative plan. As part of the work that we did with our strategic plan, we've looked at initiatives related to supply over the next 5 to 20 years. And some of those initiatives include us working with consultants to create stochastic models to look at what's the best way to source our system, including renewables and including modernizing Grayson Power Plant. And so you'll see in this, the 8.5 by 11 sheet here, the detail on power supply, that in 10, 11, 11, 12, line 2, it shows a jump from $3 million in 9-10 to $20 million in 10-11, and then $38 million in 11-12. That's a placeholder for a kind of a hypothetical peaker unit at Grayson Power Plant. We don't yet know if that's what we're going to put at Grayson Power Plant. We are in the middle of signing an agreement with Pace Global, and they're going to be assisting us in looking at that issue, including what we can do with renewables, what's the best way to burn the gas from Shoal. If we burn the gas from Shoal up at the landfill, how does that impact the plant, and can we get rid of some of the old units at the plant, and what do we do to replace them? So we've got a lot of balls in the air at the moment, and this is, like I said, a tentative plan for the next 5 years, but I think January of next year is our target to get to a point where we can make a decision on what do we really want to put at Grayson, based on the entire system and what our model shows is the best ways to optimize all the assets in the system. So this is what you have now. Once again, I really wanted to highlight that placeholder for that turbine, which is very uncertain at this point in time, and we really don't know what the outcome of that study is going to be. So the details here, it's broken down into gas turbine, capital improvements, balance of plant, plant life extension program, and then some capital for outside resources. And I'd be glad to answer any questions if you have any. And I've got more detail behind this if you're interested in what types of things we're doing with any of these programs.
When are decisions going to be made on the gas turbine project?
We're targeting January 2010. To make a decision on a lot of things related to our system. Like I indicated, what's the best way to burn gas at Shoal? What should we do at Grayson? What should we do with our renewables, and how should we scale them into the system over time? So we're kind of right in the middle of that study right now, and hoping to have a decision around the beginning of next year.
Is the cost to purchase the renewables in this table?
No, this is capital improvements at this point, which doesn't include those
Contracts.
Right.
Okay.
If you make the decision by January on Grayson and some of these other projects that are being contemplated, would you actually have enough time based on the schedule to spend the money being presented here? This seems awfully ambitious to me. That's what I mean.
The current 5-year plan?
Yeah, if you decide by January 2010, for example, that you're going to go with certain capital improvements with the gas turbines at Grayson, would you be able to go through the planning, design, and the design to be able to actually spend $38.5 million
in that year? At this point, I'm not sure. It depends on what the decision is, how big the unit is. Is it a peaker that's under 50 megawatts, or is it something bigger? At that point, we're going to have to reevaluate. I would anticipate that those numbers would probably get pushed out a bit, and ultimately, and the initiatives related to modernizing Grayson Power Plant, our ultimate target is to have some sort of modernized plant by 2014. So the target would be to have whatever new unit we're going to put there built by 2014, which isn't reflected in this plan.
Okay. I just had the sense that this was a little ambitious. Another question I have is, where's the money going to come from? Obviously, it's from bonds, I take it.
Probably.
Has it been reviewed by the financial managers to make sure that your bonding is going to be adequate to cover this?
Not yet. We need to decide what we're going to do first, and then figure out what that's going to cost, and then go through the process of looking at, is that something we do with cash or finance with bonds, et cetera.
So we'll be hearing in the commission here at some point later about where we're moving with respect to these projects.
Definitely.
How are these tied into the strategic goals of the strategic plan that was developed?
Well, one of the initiatives is to modernize Grayson Power Plant
by 2014.
By 2014 under specific schedule, and that's part of this.
Didn't I hear that the peaker is a replacement, or is this a brand new additional plant on Grayson?
Oh, like I said, decision hasn't been made. This hypothetical case probably would replace some older units, 3, 4, and 5. But at this point, like I said, we still don't have an answer on that. It's kind of a hypothetical placeholder.
So it's not something where we see as a resource adequacy or inadequacy by putting in the peaker. We're looking at modernizing rather than resource.
Yeah, it's more about efficiency, and we actually have another initiative that relates to getting the overall average efficiency of the Grayson Power Plant down below 10,000, because some of these older units that we have heat rates up around 13,500, 14,000, which is very inefficient and expensive. So we actually I don't think we're looking at adding capacity at Grayson. We get into some issues with emissions and emissions permits through AQMD if we start to add capacity.
And this peaker will be a single cycle, then obviously, since we're not going to plan to run this base load.
We have no idea yet whether it's even going to be a peaker.
We shouldn't call it peaker then, right?
Well, it's just, like I said, it's a hypothetical placeholder case. There's been no decision on it yet, and that decision will be made around the beginning of the year. And when we make that decision, we'll look at whether or not it's a simple cycle peaker, or it's a combined cycle, or it's something else completely different. A bigger unit.
When you talk about peaker, that denotes a different type of plant, whereas baseload plant, that's just a replacement of our existing power plant that we run all the time. So maybe we can just call a...
Well, we use those existing units, 3, 4, and 5, basically as peakers. I mean, we burn landfill gas from Shoal base load because we have to, but then we sell the capacity in the rest of those units as almost like peakers.
Okay, so you plan to replace the peaker with the peakers existing now.
You could characterize it that way, I guess, but the better answer, I think, is I don't know yet.
The capacity that's being planned right now, you have considered the renewable part, the acquisition, right, that we will continue to get. For instance, I know we have more than 20% right now, renewables.
We have, and I'm actually going to touch on that. The next report is on SCAPA renewables and kind of a quick update on what's going on with those, and I'll touch on where we are with our RPS and what we're doing with renewables projects.
And we're aiming to reach probably 35% by 2020. So when you're doing the planning here, have you taken that into account and decreasing the capacity? Or?
We have, and as part of this stochastic model that I mentioned that we're using our consultants to build, we're going to fill that model with data that's going to include everything we know about the regulatory landscape, everything we know about emissions limitations, everything we know about our system in terms of where we think the load's going to go and the current resources we have and the resources that we think that we're going to bring online. And we're actually going to try to optimize the timeline over which we acquire renewables in a way that optimizes the system and hopefully keeps rates as low as we can.
That's right. Thank you.
Yes, is it the case that our capital improvement plan, that we don't have any line in our capital improvement program for the renewables, that we're doing all that by through SCAPA or by contract?
All of those currently are through SCAPA.
Okay, and that's the plan going to 2020?
Yes, that's all the projects that I'm looking at right now. We're not ruling doing out something separately, but it's more efficient to work with a team that's been hired by a group of utilities, and we've got a whole team of bond counsel, inside counsel, outside counsel. Once again, I'll talk about that in a moment, but SCAPA's done a couple of waves of RFPs and looked at over 100 projects, and it just doesn't make sense to have each city doing that individually.
Understood. I just I thought that should be clarified here. Anyway, thanks for giving us heads up on this, and I certainly look forward to hearing about the development of your plans here with Grace, and others may have questions here.
Others? Next item.
SCAPA renewable projects.
Okay, so the next item is just a quick update on what is going on at SCAPA with our renewable projects. Our current adopted renewable portfolio standard is 20% by 2017. We recognize that it's going to something around 33-35% in the state, and that we will be mandated to do something along those lines. The proposed legislation is changing so much that we're kind of standing by, waiting to see what comes out of the legislature. There's been bills proposed that have 20% by 2010, and 25% by 2015, and 33% by 2020. Those exact times and targets are moving around quite a bit, but so we're standing by to see how that turns out. Council did authorize us to participate through SCAPA, through a group for development of renewables. And like I said, SCAPA's looked at a couple waves of RFP proposals, over 100 projects. Currently, there's just about a handful that are actively being negotiated. I did want to actually go back just a moment to our current RPS, and as you mentioned, you thought we were over 20%. We currently are at around 23% with Hoover, which is large hydro. Without Hoover, we're down closer to 17%. We're pretty certain that if the state mandates some sort of RPS, that we will not be able to count Hoover, because the state program for the IOUs, the Edisons and PG&E and SDG&E, aren't allowed to count large hydro projects. So we're closer to 17% given that standard. And we did recently purchase 1.2% of small hydro through a small hydro project called Tieton with SCAPA. So we are currently looking at two projects with LA, and currently it's just Glendale and LA. They're wind projects. One of them is a purchase. They're both up in the Klickitat Valley up in Washington. Linden is a 50 megawatt project total. Glendale would have 5 megawatts of that project, which equates to about an addition of 1.2% renewable portfolio standard. The cost of that is about $120 per megawatt hour, which is about $35 million over the life, at least the life of the first 20 years. And since this is a purchase, after 20 years, you would still own the project, and you would be only paying about $30 a megawatt hour. And so that's, of course, the benefit of the purchase, is that you've got that residual life after the first 20 years of bonds. Second project we're looking at is called Windy Point. It's a much bigger project. This one's got a lot of alternatives. The folks that are developing this project have an opportunity to get some stimulus money. In order to get that money, they have to own the project for the first 5-6 years. So the first alternative is it's a power purchase agreement for the first 5 or 6 years, and then at the end of that, there's an option to purchase the project. That way, they can get the stimulus money. It drives our cost down. If that actually works out and they get the money and the option goes through, then it's around delivered to Glendale. And 15 to 20 of that is just shaping and transmission to get it from the northwest down to Glendale. If it doesn't work out and the stimulus doesn't come through, then we would immediately purchase once the stimulus fails, and that would be closer to $115 a megawatt hour. That is 20 megawatts. Glendale has signed up for 20 megawatts of the 262, and that's about 4.3% renewable portfolio standard. So, as I mentioned, we have all these uncertainties and all these legislative balls in the air, and we don't know what standard's going to be adopted when. And so, once again, part of the stochastic model we're looking at is trying to help us decide when should we buy these resources and scale them into the system. We don't necessarily need them all today. You may end up with a standard that's 33% by 2020, so you've got 11 years to figure out how to scale those in. So one way that we've dealt with that issue on these two projects is that we've made an arrangement with LA, and LA has agreed that if we go into these projects with them, that they will take the for 3 years after the commercial operation date. So in most cases, we've got a commercial operation date here of March 2010 for Linden and around January 2010 for Windy Point. It gives us 3 to 3.5 years to really make a decision. They'll take the power. We will be in, but we can make a decision at any point between commercial operation date and 3 years later to decide, do we want to take a portion of that, a smaller portion, the entire amount? Do we want to take it for, through the end of the agreement or not? Or do we want none of it because the RPS has changed so dramatically that we just don't have a need for it? And so we're working on that with LA, and we think we're going to be able to achieve that, and that gives us an incredible amount of optionality with respect to those resources. And at the same time, we're not letting an opportunity pass us by, because they've been negotiating a long time on a lot of these projects, and as I said, over 100 proposals have been looked at, and we're only actively negotiating on about a handful of them. The others just aren't moving forward. There's problems with credit and financing and all sorts of things related to the project. So our experience to date has been that the projects that we got in early have been much cheaper than the projects that we got in later. So we're just trying to give ourselves some flexibility with these projects. So
this is with hydro and wind.
These are these two,
Both
Linden
wind?
and Windy Point, are both wind.
Okay.
And we purchased small hydro, went to council a couple months ago. Tieton, it was a small hydro project. That was 1.2%.
That's right. Are we looking at solar at all?
We are looking at one project, the name? La Paz. We call it the Tower of Power because it's a big, huge ceramic stack out in the middle of the desert. I can never remember the real name. We're looking at that project. That's somewhat competitive, or at least it's in the price range. All the other solar is just not competitive. I mean, you saw on these projects, we're basically around $100. Not too long ago, I think it was San Francisco or PG&E, I think it was San Francisco, signed the single largest municipal solar deal in the country, and it was over $200 a megawatt hour. So that's over double, what we're paying. So we currently don't have specific solar targets. We don't anticipate, I know the federal bill doesn't have specific solar targets, but, one of our main charges is to try to keep rates down. So we'll keep looking at it. We've got a lot of proposals, and they come in, and we talk to them, and we look at their proposals, but they're just, at this point, they haven't gotten competitive yet.
Any idea when the legislature is going to decide what they're going to do and assign a value or a percentage?
We actually, there's two bills, AB 64 and SB 14, that had hearings last week, and they're going to committee this week. So we actually think, by August we may have some idea. It's something similar to what I mentioned, except I think some of these targets are slipping. So this 20% by 2010, I think they're talking about 23% by 2014. And then it escalates up. But we won't know for sure until it comes out of committee and we've got a bill. But It just seems like at this time that it doesn't make sense to structure our RPS around something when we don't know what it is when it's so close. I think we're kind of standing by, see what comes out, and then kind of work with it.
What about any geothermal projects? Are we looking at any?
We are looking actually at 3 phases of geothermal projects in Utah, and those are in the handful of projects that are actively being negotiated. And we like geothermal. It's competitively priced and it's base load. You don't have the problems that you have with wind of the intermittency. So yeah, basically geothermal and wind are the top contenders at the moment.
Because geothermal is more consistent throughout time,
Yeah, it's
right?
24/7 base load. So that's all I have, unless you have any other questions.
Yes, I have some clarifying questions. So, I mean, we can anticipate actually, because a lot of the industry standards are moving towards that 32% by 2020. I think even though we're saying we're speculating that potentially the bill could pass, but I think a lot of people in the industry are gearing towards that goal, that a lot of people are saying that it will happen, 33% by 2020. And so my question is on the other extreme, because you might have heard that the Los Angeles mayor had said there's no coal. So we can actually increase RPS by maybe taking away coal. Is that something that GWP is looking at also, is to do away with coal?
I don't know if you don't actually increase your RPS by taking away coal. I mean, what they calculate RPS by, megawatt hours of your total megawatt hours that is renewable. So if you take away coal and replace it with something that's not
preferably
RPS,
renewable, yeah.
you'd have to
they're saying
replace it
because
with
renewable.
something that's renewable. So you couldn't replace it with efficient, new gas. It'd have to be renewable. So I'm sorry, I missed the question.
Also maybe a preference with GWP is to in the future to do away with coal because that's more emitting. It creates more carbon emissions. So since the city of Los Angeles is taking a major step trying to say that we're going to do away with coal completely by 2020 also, is GWP looking at something similar where we can reduce our greenhouse gas emission by eliminating coal?
Well, coal is definitely the biggest impact on our emissions. I think that Glendale actually is lucky in the sense that the amount of coal that we have is much less than some of our sister cities. I think these are about, approximate numbers, but Pasadena's 60-some% coal, and we're 30-some% coal. So we've got about half of the IPP output that they have. So I saw an analysis on the Waxman bill that showed the impact to Glendale was only 1.1%. And that's because our percentage of coal is so low. But we are a participant in IPP and some other projects, and with LA saying that they're going to be getting out of that project, we obviously have to look at it. That just came out at the end of last week, and I think the folks at SCAP are setting up meetings to talk about how we might deal with that. But we've got contracts through 2027 and bonds through 2023, 24, sometime after 2020. So you've got sunk costs out there, and I'm not sure what their strategy is for divesting of that coal. I presume it includes taking out those bonds, but at this point we'll be looking at all of the things that LA will be looking at because we're partners with them in those projects.
That's good. Thank you.
Any others? Mr. Miller?
Yeah, as the uncertainties that you've talked about going to negatively impact your goal of achieving the optimal or the balanced energy portfolio by 2020?
Well, the initiative that you're referring to, the balanced portfolio, really means trying to get a fuel diversity. Trying to have some wind, some geothermal, some gas, some. And I think we're pretty much already achieving that, and we will continue to focus on that as we optimize our assets through this stochastic model that we're building. I don't think it affects the ability to have balanced. It's just a matter of timing on when you scale certain resources into the system.
You've made several references to a stochastic model. Is that a model that's being developed in-house or with a consultant?
It's being developed by Pace Global, and also we've got Beck working on another model that we use in conjunction with that.
And the output of that model is to basically indicates what kind of investment you should make in a particular green energy project by a certain date to meet certain goals.
Well, the goal of the model is to optimize the entire system. So,
Right.
We'll be putting in every piece of data that we have related to greenhouse gas regulations, load, system requirements, and we can run, infinite what-if scenarios, and it will spit out ranges of optimal solutions. And then it's a little bit, I think, like reading the tea leaves. It doesn't say do this. It's kind of like, okay, here's your range of opportunities here. Then you've got to kind of look at it and talk about it with staff and your consultants and say, what makes sense? Because, it's only as good as the data you put into it, and forecasting legislative outcomes is tricky business.
You speak as though the model's still under development. Is it completed, or is it...
It's still under development. In fact, we have a kickoff meeting towards the end of this month with PACE.
Any idea when the model would be completed?
We're looking at September, the end of September this year.
We'll be hearing more about it, I take it?
If you'd like to, we'd be glad to bring it in and show it to you.
I would think it's prudent. Thank you.
Questions, comments? Sheila, next item.
Oral communications.
A request to speak from Herbert Milano.
Chairman Foley, members of the Commission, staff, my name is Herbert Milano. Good afternoon. I have 6 topics to bring to you. The first one is that I've had a water conservation audit on my building. I've received the cooperation fairly quickly from the water utility. They're very courteous, very much focused on helping me out. And I think one of the major things about this type of audit for tenants is that it really highlighted to them their importance. In other words, the meeting and the consultation really heightened their demand, because at the end of the day, I have no way of checking individually whether they're going to comply. But I think that meeting itself had what I perceive as significant impact with them to really address that issue. The second 2 items have to do with the electricity and the electrical utility. I would like to request, if at all possible, that perhaps you could agendize a report on what charges are being made to the Glendale Unified School District. Glendale Unified School District pays $4 million a year to a combination of the GWP and another utility for the areas up north. But from my cursory look at the documents that I requested from them, some of the schools are paying a whopping amount of 25 cents per kilowatt hour, and they vary completely from school to school. When I got the report, I really doubted if it was basically a comprehensive cost, but it appears that the school district is now being overloaded with those costs, and if you can save $1 million to the school district, that's an additional 50 teachers that the school district can actually hire. And I don't think it is just for the city to be charging so much of their general fund by drawing this money that causes the rates to go up. And at the end of the day, it is the school district that is paying a significant cost to this high charges. My opinion, the school district should be paying no more than 12 cents per kilowatt hour overall, but that's just my feeling. I would also like to suggest that perhaps for the residents, if we're reaching now, I think 10% or more of unemployment, I've had to tell you frankly, I've had to reduce rents of tenants who are really having a significant difficulty out there. I think I'm doing my share of ensuring that people have a livable, an affordable life here in Glendale. But my suggestion is that we may perhaps think of a program like a 10-10 program, 10 cents per kilowatt hour for the first, for the first 10 hours of per day, for the first 10 kilowatt hours. Because I think that the wait for many people is really extreme. Paying 16 cents per kilowatt hour for these people is really way too much, in my opinion, and I think they should be agendized for review. The next 2 items have to do with water. Many people are very concerned about going back to the 2006. You've heard that, I'm sure, many times. I'd like to make a suggestion that, first of all, that we get a report on the electronic bills as to the usage of gallons per day. I'd love to see that clearly stated. We're still not getting that. And it's kind of archaic to look at it in the other measures. The other suggestion I have with regard to water is that I suggest that we study an allocation for the first tier. My suggestion is like 50 gallons per day per person, so that tier would be at the lowest possible cost to individuals, and so that what you do with the second tier and the other tiers, I think, should justify the needs for the utility to be able to be self-sufficient. But I think that for many people, a cost of an allocation of 50 gallons per person per day should probably be adequate. The last item I want to bring up is the issue of the strategic plan. So the utilities spend a significant amount on the strategic plan. But from my experience, that strategic plan should be brought up every single month to align all of your initiatives and policies to that strategic plan to say, if this is where we want to be, and if this is the target, this policy fits that in the following way. In Glendale, and not just for the utility, but practically all departments, they develop a strategic plan and then it's shoved away in a file. And that's not a strategic plan, not unless you execute it. And I thought perhaps with the experience that you do have, at least with implementing targets and goals, that maybe we can structure that so that these meetings truly begin to address, and that it is my hope that other departments look at at a proper way of taking a strategic plan and truly making it work, especially as you have other policies and issues coming from Sacramento affecting the strategic plan. It will be great to see that relationship and see how it impacts it. Thank you very much.
Just one point of clarification, I think, in response to that. The 2006 rates or limits or levels are gone out of the new ordinance, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so the concern over the 2006 and residents and what they know or don't know, that's really a non-issue at this point, right?
With regard to the water conservation
Correct.
ordinance, it's not an issue in terms of enforcement.
Okay, thank you. Comments? Next item.
I actually have a question. Miller. Mr. Milano, you mentioned that Glendale Unified School District was paying so much money. How did you know that? Are you a member
yes,
of the board?
No, I'm not. I did a California Records Act request.
Oh, okay.
Because I happen to know that our rates are one of the highest in California, I figured, is it possible that we are charging the Unified School District, right, from one governmental entity to another one, in a similar way that we're charging residents? And to my surprise, from the records that I obtained through the California Public Records Act, it appears to me that the rates are even exceed 16 cents per kilowatt hour that we charge residents. So I questioned them on it. I requested a meeting with the head of finance, and it is likely that they're combining taxes and everything else. And I don't know if they're paying taxes. I don't if they're supposed to, but I don't think they are because it's a government agency. Nonetheless, different schools are getting charged different rates. They're not being charged in one comprehensive amount. I know that the total amount is $4 million, and I wish I would have brought. I just hurried to this meeting today, and I left my documents. But I do have the documents available. I can scan them and send them to you. But it is a major concern because it is a huge impact on the schools. And I know that what is the total? About $30 million that is being transferred. I don't know the exact number for this fiscal year that is being transferred from the utility to the general fund. So in a way, you can say that the reduction in the staffing for teachers at the Glendale Unified School District is being done so that, right, we can provide sufficient funds to the general fund. And that's my interpretation of it, because at the end of the day, it's all part of the same system.
Mr. President, members of the Commission, GWP has tariff rates. Those rates are adopted in the Glendale Municipal Code. Everybody on a specific rate pays the exact same rate according to the rate that they're on. Nobody's paying something higher or lower. If you're on a specific rate, commercial, light commercial, residential, anybody in that specific rate's paying the exact same rate according to, what's adopted in the Glendale Municipal Code, and that's the tariff rates that we have. So I don't know what rate they're on. You can't respond specifically to that until you understand what rate they're on, but nobody's being charged more than somebody else on the same rate.
One point of clarification I would like to make is on the idea of discounting the initial water that's used. I understand that we already do that. We provide 1,000 cubic feet per month at a discounted rate, which is about, I think, around 2/3 of the cost of water after that, from what I recall.
I'm not familiar with that, but maybe staff can answer that question.
Are you referring to the tiered rates for water?
Yeah, that's correct, yeah.
The
First 1,000 cubic feet.
the first, excuse me for 1 second, I was just caught off guard for a minute. The first 1,000 cubic feet
No.
is at 73 cents,
Okay.
and then thereafter $1.45.
Okay, so it's actually half, a little bit half the amount. And that translates to about 250 gallons a day, I think, roughly.
In 1 HCF is 748 gallons.
Yeah.
Is that correct? 748 gallons per 100 cubic feet. And that's the base rate, not the adjusted.
Right. Also, I wanted to say, with respect to the strategic plan, your point's well taken. I think we were looking at quarterly updates, and in this meeting, we've already alluded to the strategic plan a couple of times to see how it's tying in with developments, and we'll continue doing so. So thank you for bringing that up, though.
And with the format of the bill, I thought I've seen gallons per day before. Yeah. Thanks, Tammy.
Actually, thank you for bringing that up, because we do show the gallons. We convert the HCF in the billing period to gallons. We were in the process of revising the entire bill based on the 2006 concept for water conservation. And included in that concept, we added the daily average for both electric and for water. So we were ready to display that. We have now gone in another direction. So we don't need to include the 2006 information, so we are now revising the bill again. What I believe Mr. Milano is referring to is that if you go online to look at your bill, it looks similar to an actual bill, but it's not an actual bill. So he's correct. On the online portion, it does not show the gallons.
Okay.
Once we revise the new bill, we can then make changes to make the electronic portion
As well.
look similar as well.
Okay.
Currently, the bill shows the gallons on the hard copy of the bill that you received in the mail.
It shows the gallons, but not the daily average in gallons.
The intent is to change that?
The intent is to give customers a lot more information, not only the daily average, but in gallons, but also in HCFs, and possibly do a comparison for last year and this year in a daily average as well.
Well, there is a point in that terms like 100 cubic feet and billing unit and so on are somewhat esoteric. You know, they're related to the industry, and the average consumer is not going to make much sense out of it. So if it is translated into something that's a little bit easier for the consumer to understand, that'll certainly be in the interests of both the utility and the consumer.
You're absolutely correct. Some utilities have daily average, some have cubic feet, and we have 100 cubic feet. So trying to get all of that information for the customer will benefit them.
Thank you.
Next item.
Item 6, old business, past 5-year CIP report.
I did want to mention, Dave Davis isn't here anymore, but he did give me the 8.5 by 14 that I gave you that had the past 5 years for all sections of GWP. I didn't prepare to go over it, but you've got it, and if you have any questions, I can take those back to Dave and we'll get them answered next time.
Any questions for him?
Just out of curiosity, it might be worthwhile knowing what the actual amounts spent were compared to the amounts budgeted. But that's, I'm not expecting an answer now. I'd be kind of curious to see how your budgeting system works.
Okay. I'll pass that on.
No, thanks.
Next item.
New business,
Any new business? None? Next item.
agenda forecast.
Any items to add to the agenda?
I didn't get an agenda forecast sheet. We've normally been getting those every meeting. Was that passed out this time, or did I simply miss it?
Oh, gee, I thought so. Let me see if I have an extra one.
Did anyone else get one? You did get one?
Electronic.
I missed the email. Okay. Oh, there we go. All right. Okay. When's our next quarterly strategic plan discussion? Oh, here I see it's in October. Okay. No, that's quarterly risk management. Do we have the quarterly strategic plan goals being discussed? We were going to do that quarterly. It needs to get in maybe in November. It's already been, when did we
Well, I know we
publish this
just
thing?
finished a report card effective July 1 for the strategic plan. I don't know when
Could we have
staff
it
was
in-
planning on bringing that to commission, but I presume if it's completed, we could probably bring it next month. The report card is completed, I think, for the first quarter, so.
So can we put it on the agenda for next month? And if
Sure.
we can't do it, then we'll bump it to the following month.
Yeah, the plan, I think, was published in March, so we should have
Then we have the
actually
report
something.
card effective July 1 that was just done, so we can bring
Okay,
that
we're
next-
running a little bit late then
next
with the
meeting.
first quarterly report. It should come out. It's understandable the first report would be a little bit late. We haven't done it before. It'll be routine, hopefully, next time around. Thanks.
Any other agenda forecast items?
The stochastic model that we talked about earlier, I think Steve mentioned the model will be completed by September?
It's targeted to be completed at the end of September '09.
Okay. Maybe we can put that on the agenda for maybe November, or...
Yeah.
And we can talk, I guess, as we get closer, more about what it is you might actually want to see.
Can we put it on right now, and then as we get...
For November?
Yeah, for November.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then for the next meeting, also an update on the ordinance and if everything's going as planned.
That should be monthly. Yeah.
Any other agenda items?
Your 5-year capital improvement plan that you started talking about it today, and as you mentioned, a lot of balls are in the air. When could you next talk about it, where we have a more definite idea about what's going to happen in the next 5 years?
As I mentioned, pursuant to the strategic plan, we are targeting January 2010 for a decision, so it probably makes sense to put it off till after the first of the year.
Could it be scheduled for that?
Sure.
All right.
I guess like March 2010.
Okay.
5-year CIP. Okay.
I remember in one of our previous meetings, it was discussed where, because the effective rate for the water conservation Phase 2 is not going to occur until maybe the end of July or early August, we're going to be short of revenue for that 1 month because the rate has not been changed. I remember it was discussed where different scenarios were going to be brought back, and we're going to discuss different ways to mitigate the revenue shortfall. I don't know whether...
Well, I'm sure we can bring that back once again as part of maybe a detailed conversation with Mr. Kavunas and Mr. Steiger regarding the
when they come
conservation
back.
program next month.
Yeah. So I don't know whether that should be on the agenda or not.
For next month?
Next.
I believe Mr. Kavunas could certainly address that at the next meeting, but I think that would have gone into effect had the city opted for the percentage cutback. But since we're going the route of landscaping restrictions, the decision was made not to proceed with that based on the fact that it's very difficult to determine what the reduction in water usage would be from landscape watering. But perhaps we can have Peter Kavunas address that as part of the general water conservation ordinance item next month.
Okay. I would think if we want to implement a program like that, we are anticipating a substantial cut. I mean, we're essentially telling people we cannot water 100% of the time, cut all the way down to 50% or less. So we are still dealing with a shortfall issue there. That, I mean, I would think you don't want to, you wouldn't implement a program where you don't anticipate a certain amount of success. So anyway, I think we can discuss that with Peter next time and ask him to go over it.
Peter will have a lot to answer.
Yes. All right, thank you.
Any other items?
Can we also get some of the external risk factors, as Mr. Lins mentioned before, that these different bills pending in Sacramento could adversely impact our RPS? Can we get maybe quarterly updates on legislations that impact GWP?
You want just kind of a legislative update?
Yeah, something like that. Quarterly.
Actually, we have an admin analyst who is officially starting July 1, and You may know her or have seen her around. Lana Haddad used to be in the city manager's office. She is and staffed the committee on women, and we're glad to have her on board, and she's been a big help already, and she'll be, I think, moving into her office officially around July 8th or 9th. And so we can work with her to put together kind of a quarterly legislative update, because there is a lot going on.
Yeah, that'll be great.
Great.
And maybe not just legislation, but can we also have any external factors? Could be FERC related, could be federal legislations, not just state legislations. So it could be even be.
So you're talking about state and federal regulation or legislation that relates to the renewable portfolio standard?
LPS is one item, but anything like that impacts operations. It could be CalISO that we're trying to enter into long-term contracts to buy or sell power. It could be anything like that.
Sure.
Any external risk factors. That's part of our strategic plan, was to look at what impacts our operations.
Okay.
Any other items? Next item.
Adjournment.
Move to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
The next meeting will be Monday, August 3rd, 2009 at 4 p.m. Thank you.